Hi everyone, Gandalfax here for a sixth and brand new episode of our special edition Law of the Universal Century. Today, we're going to the mid-UC90s in an attempt to answer a particular question, which is... Yep, in this video, we are going to recense every mobile suit created by the Federation UC project, their background lore and technological aspects, a topic I will cover on the request of Unicorn Enjoyer Side3 Studio. But let's start by the beginning. What is exactly the UC project? Started in the early UC94, the UC project was a special mobile suit development project issued as part of the Earth Federation Forces reconstruction plan post the events of Shar counterattack. The Second Neo-Zeon War had been brief but devastating for the Federation forces. Sure, newborn Neo-Zeon had lost its leader and a lot of its primary actors, but Lodo Bell had taken quite heavy casualties, and the Luna 2 garrison had been mauled greatly as well. Aside the number of destroyed mobile suits and a floating corpse in space, Lhasa led in ruin after having nuked by an asteroid drop, and the war had been followed by a brief period of chaos, which some groups, like the Botch Concert, had aptly used to subtilize military-grade war material for their own goals. The Federation, however, was not letting this continue for long. The war had taught them three things. First, there wouldn't be any official negotiation with any Neo-Zeon group anymore, as Shar blatantly broke the deal quite a few times. Second, Anaheim Electronics had clearly played both sides, and an alternative was needed to counter this fraudulent mega-corporation. Thirdly, the conflict had showed them the danger of new type-use mobile suits, which had become the key actors of this war, and a stopgap measure against Neo-Zeon new type was crucial. The response to Anaheim treachery was the creation, as we saw in an earlier video, of the Strategic Naval Research Institute. Still, ironically enough, the scenery was too young to carry alone the burden of the reconstruction plan, and while it was tasked with the design of the next generation Grand Gym, the Ghost of Karl, it was Anaheim Electronics which ended up manufacturing most of the tech used for the reconstruction plan. The regular reconstruction plan notably involved Vic Wellington manufacturing a new Dogose Gear class, the General Revel, and the creation by Anaheim Electronics of the Gigant D-Type and the early plan for the Reed Seal. However, while these techs could refill the Federation depleted ranks, the Earth Federation top brass was aware that these measures wouldn't be enough to deal with Neo-Zeon new types, and thus a supplementary contract was issued secretly to Anaheim. Thus, the UC project was born. This project aimed to the development of mobile suits capable of taking down enemy new type use mobile suits and give the Federation an edge against the cyber new types of Neo-Zeon. Now, it's important to note that the Federation had already tried fighting the fire with fire. Of course, new type use mobile suits could be fought by other new type use mobile suits on an equal footing, and the Federation had already tried that. We all know and love Amuro Ray and his new type use new Gundam, but there were other new type use assets the Federation had possessed, such as the cyber new type Juma Kazama and this Nocturne, which was a captured Queen Mansa modified with data from the Psycho Gundams and Bound Dog parts. Now, in UC93, Amuro and Juma, which had been both part of Londo Bell, were dead, and finding replacements was difficult. Not only pureblood new types were rare, but the Federation's skepticism around them made that young new types were rarely detected in the Federation academies. Even worse, the numbers of Earth Federation cyber new types were reducing, because at the end of the Griff's War, the AUG supporters had pushed the Federation into implementing a policy allowing the surgery, something Neo-Zeon had never respected, and which had enabled them to create more and more cyber new types. The UC project now aimed to create technologies which would be able to defeat new type use mobile suits without the particular need of a new type pilot. Well, at least that was initially the goal. It's also important to understand that against common belief, the UC project was not meant to genocide new types. After all, the Federation feared the new types, yes, but was quite happy to use them as special pilots, as seen with Lane namely in Data Wave Flash, as long as they didn't question the orders and didn't start compassionate speech about love and freedom in the space colonies. No, the UC project aimed to purge something else, which was not really the remaining Neo-Zeon groups, but the trace of Zeonims in the Earthsphere, and this included the myth of Zeon Diacom new types, which stated that the new types were the next stage of the evolution. But the Federation goal was not mature yet, and Anaheim needed time to give something valuable for this project. But that's enough setting for today, and let's get to our mobile suits. The UC project, as said earlier, aimed to eradicate Zeonism, and it was clear to everyone involved that the final result of such project would be Gundams, which were one of the strongest symbols of the Federation itself. Anaheim too was aware of that, but the project had to start somewhere, and Anaheim decided to start it by mixing the best designs it had in its sleeves. The two mobile suits which served the base were the new Gundam and the Sazabi, both of which were most certainly the best mobile suits back in UC-93. Both models had been lost during the Second Neo-Zeon War, but their respective manufacturing facilities, the Von Braun factory for the new Gundam and the Granada facility for the Sazabi, were both properties of Anaheim Electronics, and despite the loss of the prototypes, backup data and flight simulations could provide the necessary data needed for the creation of a successor unit. The engineers at Anaheim then mixed both designs, which resulted in the creation of the infamous mobile suit known as the Sinanju-Stein. As you could clearly see, the Sinanju-Stein retained elements from the Gundam lineage, but the design was still very close to a Neo-Zeon mobile suit, and it wasn't very fit to be part of the Federation plan to eradicate Zeon designs, as it was a screaming one itself. But Anaheim couldn't care less. After all, they had never planned for the bastard child of the Sazabi and the new Gundam to be the end result of the project, nor for it to be a Gundam in the first place. The only goal of this mobile suit was practically to be a beta tester for all the technical features they planned to use for the future Gundam. Nothing more, nothing less. Among these features was the Psycho Frame that the company had acquired during the last war. Now, a small pause to the Sinanju tale to explain the Psycho Frame. Basically, it's a dissolved Psychomu. Let me explain. The original Psychomu, or biosensor, is similar to a box. This box amplifies the psycho waves of the new type pilot and spreads them to other flying bits of funnels, where the signal is converted to make them move. Initially, the Psychomu was quite a large thing, which could only be installed in mobile armors like the helmet, but miniaturization had later enabled small mobile suits like the Cubile to use it. Now, the Psycho Frame is a metal, which integrates the Psychomu inside the frame. Basically, Psycho Frame can be different metals, Gundarium or even titanium alloy, but where the amplifying chips are encased between the metal atoms instead of being only located inside the Psychomu box. In the Sazabi and the New, the Psycho Frame was only used in the cockpit, but Anaheim had decided to try making a whole suit entirely made of Psycho Frame. The idea was to create a mobile suit with a design not hampered by a large Psychomu, while retaining the best features of having one. Now, Anaheim was not yet familiar with the Psycho Frame, and instead of making a full Psycho Frame mobile suit directly, they decided to refine their knowledge first with the Sinanju-Stein. This means that while the Sinanju retained a full Psycho Frame cockpit, some parts, essentially internal joints and pipes, are also made of Psycho Frame, which serve as a proof of concept for the succeeding series. The other addition to the Sinanju was the Intention Automatic System, which was essentially a reconfiguration of the Psychomu used. Instead of amplifying the Psycho wave and spreading them across space, the EAS just applied to the mobile suit control the process which normally happens in the funnels. The Psycho waves are converted into an electric signal, but the process is more refined than with funnels, as this system covers many command control which allow the pilot to pilot the suit with thoughts alone, and without regular levers. Two prototype Sinanju were completed, with the first unit being outfitted with a rifle inherited from the arsenal of the full armor new Gundam and a shield from the regular new. While Unit 1 was used for flight tests, Unit 2 was held in storage as a reserve spare part donor. At the end of the testing phase, the Sinanju has successfully proved the success of the EAS and the Psycho Frame goods, But there was a slight problem. Anaheim had spent a bunch of money on the prototypes, and not only the Federation forces were not eager to batch such a displeasing design, but the Sinanju had its own share of flaws. Simply, it was a suicidal suit. Why? Well, because the design simply maximized the G-forces exerted on the pilot, and it could only be operated unmanned, as the pilots could die during the tests. Theoretically, only a Cyber new type could handle such machine, but there was no proof of it at all. So it meant that Anaheim Electronics had now two costly units which would not bring any profit. But the mega corporation was crooky, and they soon found a solution to this problem. First, they sold the prototypes to the Federation, but they immediately struck a deal with the largest Neozian movement around, the Sleeves. The position of the ships transporting the Sinanjus was leaked to them, and soon after, their leader, Full Frontal, personally led a mission to hijack both units. Now, this secret transfer almost failed because the Federation escort fought back, thus forcing Full Frontal to destroy and kill everyone present in order to destroy all evidences. But in the end, the two Sinanju Steins ended up in the Sleeves' hands. Both units were first marked with the Sleeves' signature ornaments, and Unit 1 was overhauled, receiving notably a red paint sham, a new mono-eye camera, and additional thrusters, and was assigned a Full Frontal new machine. For the information, the tuning was reduced as well, as the suit was simply too responsive even for a Cyber new type like Frontal. The second unit was initially put to storage to provide spare parts for Unit 1 and then later for the Rhodes and Zulu, but was in the end sorted by the Sleeve Remnant during Operation Phoenix Hunt, where it would be destroyed. On Anaheim's side, things were great. We don't know if the Sleeves actually paid Anaheim something for the Sinanju Stein, but the mega corporation had its own plan. They came back crying that the Sleeves had stolen the Sinanju Steins and that the Federation needed to pay a bit of an extra in order to accelerate the creation of the final result of the UC project. With the scenery toying with miniaturization at that time, and with Neozion being in possession of two powerful machines, the Federation had to reluctantly agree, leading to all the suits we will see very soon. The year is Universal Century 94, and the UC project was nearing completion. The Sinanju Stein had proved to be a success, and the following phase, aiming to the creation of Gundams, could now start. Thus, the production of the RX-0 Gundam line finally became a reality. Against common belief, the RX-0 original plan was not composed of only 1 or 3 units, as often considered, but by 2 units and a supplementary frame. Unit 1 and Unit 2 were there, well, as prototypes, and the supplementary frame had been manufactured as a backup in the case of a scenario where one of the units was damaged beyond repairs during the testing phase. These units, named the Unicorns, would later leave their mark in history. Or did they? The first unit, Unit 1, also known as the Unicorn Gundam and later the Singularity 1, was the first of these machines and distinguished itself from its sister units by its immaculate color sham. Entirely made of Psychoframe, the Unicode Gundam was, needless to say, a state-of-the-art mobile suit and boosted an extraordinary performance coupled with extremely high stats. As a standard equipment, the Unicorn wielded a Nova-Team beam rifle named the Beam Magnum, which had the particularity to use an entire ECAP magazine for its shots, which reduced the number of shots, but which were in return extraordinarily powerful, and had the particularity of having a special recoil, making it fit only for the RX-0 series. Aside this rifle, the Unicorn was also outfitted with a special Psychoframe shield, and could remotely control as much as 3 of them as sort of large bits, with half adjacent Psychomu as the whole frame was full of Psychochips. Ice on the cake, these very large bits had good aerodynamics and had each an inbuilt Eiffel generator, which effectively made them very difficult to shoot down. But the Unicorn true power did not reside neither in its stats, neither in its handled weapons. The true asset of the RX-0s was the inclusion of a very special system in their very own design. Named NTD and standing for New Type Destroyer System, this brand new technology was the key part of the UC project as a whole. Basically, the NTD was a visionary feature which transformed the already impressive Unicorn into an anti-New Type machine. But let's see how it worked. Upon encountering an hostile new type-use machine, the Unicorn would receive some of the amplified psycho waves delivered by the psychomo of the enemy, and which would be picked by all the psycho chips encoded its metal frame as it was psycho frame. As a response to that, the NTD would activate and would transform the Unicorn into its destroy state, unfolding in the process the frame all over its body, and thus revealing special metal frames with a higher concentration of psycho chips, which would glow red. Once the transformation was completed, the NTD would forcibly turn down all the limiters, thus enhancing the Unicorn performance to even higher levels. Notably, the max acceleration drastically increased and grew from 3G to roughly 10G, with the perfected Unicorn seen at the end of the OVA even reaching 20G. This basically means that with the NTD, the Unicorn placed itself as one of the fastest units of the whole Universal Century, being only competed by the F-99 Record Breaker, the Ghost Gundam, and later the Victory 2 Gundam. But this tremendous boost of speed was not without issues for the pilot, and the NTD also impacted the cockpit to accommodate this issue. Basically, the linear seat transformed into a sort of cradled cocoon, which would encase the pilot and reduce the effect of the G-forces exerted. Additionally, the NTD would also administrate a military drug to the pilot, named the DDS, which fluidified his blood circulation as IG forces tending to stagnate it. However, ironically enough, these two features were not enough to relieve all the G-forces, and the best fit for the NTD, a new type Hunter system, was a new type itself, as yet a natural air resistance to the G-forces. Nonetheless, 5 minutes of NTD were considered the limit prior to the pairing of Banagolink with Unit 1. Now, the most important thing about the NTD. Basically, the NTD is an unsentient system, which means that upon encountering an enemy new type-use machine, the NTD would proceed to transform and engage a combat, a process that couldn't be controlled by the pilot even if he didn't want to fight. Now, that's not entirely true. In fact, the Unicode Gundam had also inherited the intention automatic system from the Sinanju's time, and a new type pilot, if powerful enough, could override the automatic activation of the NTD or activate it at will by sheer will alone. But the NTD didn't just boost the performance of the mobile suit, actually, it had another asset in its sleeves. Basically, the NTD could also emit particular signals, which were not hampered by Minovsky effect and were sort of fake psycho waves. The NTD would spread them across space in the form of a pulse, and these signals would soon reach the funnels controlled by the enemy new type-use mobile suits. Due to the rather simple functioning of the funnels, which just converted psycho wave into crude command controls, the fake psycho wave of the NTD would easily override the funnels and bring them under the control of the Unicorn to use against their own previous master. Anaheim had created the perfect new type Hunter, and the Federation had now the suit they had long waited for. However, the main family behind Anaheim, the Viz Foundation, had their own plan. While Unit 2 was immediately sent to the Federation, the original Unicorn was put to storage under the pretext of continuing the testing. The testing continued until UC-96, where the chairman of Anaheim, Claudius Vist, decided to install another program in the Unicorn named the Laplace program, which acted as a sort of map for a sort of treasure hunt, with the final treasure being the Laplace box. This brings us to the events of the Unicorn OVA, which ended up with the opening of the Laplace box and the Unicorn displaying incredible abilities. As soon as the Sony-Asian War was over, the Federation sealed all the Unicorns, out of fear of their power, but Unit 1 was merely recovered by its pilots, Banagolink, would seal it itself until a future where the best of possibility would be needed. During its service, Unit 1 was transformed into the full armor Unicorn at some point, which notably mounted Neo-Zeon beam Gatling guns, the Armored Armor DE, a Harper Javelin, 8 Grenax racks from Jagan spare parts, and multiple anti-ship missiles inherited from the Stark J-gun. However, all these were purgeable equipment, and Unit 1 eventually reverted to its original state and all the weapons became deadweight. An even more imposing Unicorn variant appeared in the retelling of the final combat of the OVA in UC Perfectibility, named the Unicorn Perfectibility Divine, which featured all the features of the 3 Unicorns. But that's enough beast of possibility for today, and let's turn our attention to the black sheep of the UC project. We talk about Unit 1, which likely indicate the existence of other units, because we took some time to give the units a number. The second unit of the RX-0 series was the infamous Gundam Banshee, also known as the Black Lion. Unit 1 and Unit 2 were developed together and were not only similar, but in fact identical twin units. To differentiate them, the Banshee was painted in gold and black colors and was given a different, but more ornated V-fin. When I say that the Banshee was identical to the Unicorn, that's not an half statement. Its functionment is nearly equal, and it possessed the same psycho-frame structure, intention automatic system, new type destroyer system, and basic arsenal. However, both units have their share of differences as well. First, the Banshee doesn't possess the Lapus program, as it was immediately shipped to the Earth Federation forces upon completion. Secondly, the Banshee was never directly involved in the Base Foundation plan involving the Laplace box, and was meant for the regular forces of the Federation, and thus it made use of various additional weapons pack, the armored armors, that the Unicorn Unit 1 didn't get to use until its final refitment into the full armor form. The first of these weapons was the Vibration Nail, which was a psycho-frame crafted super vibrating claw which could be used against enemy mobile suits, and also had a defensive role as it was covered with anti-beam coating. Aside the VN armored armor, the Banshee also made use of the Beam Smart Gun armored armor, which was your average sniping beam smart gun, but this time made of psycho-frame, and which transmitted the data collected by the sensors in the form of a psycho-wave signal, essentially making this armored armor a predecessor to cerebral computing. Now, one of the characteristics of the Banshee is that unlike the Unicorn, who pretty much remained the same for all its service, it underwent multiple refitments during its life. The Banshee initially appeared as the Banshee Early type, which had even less gold parts and wasn't equipped with the armored armors. The Banshee Early type was assigned to the General Revel, and in UC-95 it participated alongside the third unit in a Twisted Turnitin game, which ended up badly as Unit 3 went rogue and disappeared, but not before mauling the Banshee Early type and leaving behind what would be called as the Echelon Incident. The Banshee Early type was badly damaged but still functional, and the Earth Federation forces brought back the unit to Anaheim, who repaired the unit but also performed a general overhaul. The general performance was enhanced and the optional armored armors started seeing their use, resulting in the creation of the regular Banshee. After the end of the refitment, the Banshee was sent to the Augusta Labs, which was now Anaheim property despite some of its members having joined the scenery. Here, the Banshee was tuned for 1G combat, which gave it an edge over the regular Unicorn. When Marauder Cruz was captured and brainwashed, she was paired with the Banshee and tasked to apprehend the Unicorn. Tasks she failed and left the Banshee without a pilot. Then, the Banshee was brought yet again to Anaheim facilities, but since the mission to apprehend the Unicorn had shifted to space, the Banshee was overhauled for the second time, transforming it into the Banshee Norn. The Banshee Norn had an even higher performance than the basic Banshee, but it introduced some changes in its armored armors. The VN and BS parts were discarded and were replaced by two new armored armors, the DE and the XC. The first one stands for Defensive Extension, and is basically the Unicorn shield but with additional thrusters and an inbuilt Mega Beam cannon. This not only augments the defensive and offensive capabilities of the Banshee Norn, but it can also be fixed on the back of the mobile suit and serve as a sort of subfight system similarly to the base Jaybird. The other new armored armor is the XC, aka Xenoconnect, which is mounted on the neck of the Banshee and also extends itself when the NTD is in use. The Xenoconnect was developed by the engineering team who worked on the Nitro system and facilitated the use of the Banshee for all-type pilots. The XC was essentially a sort of parabola, which would use the psycho waves under by enemy new type use machines to help an old-type pilot to control the NTD. In the original Unicorn, a powerful new type could channel his own psycho wave into the intention automatic system to tame the NTD. With the Xenoconnect, an old-type pilot could tame the NTD as well, but by using not his own psycho waves but those from his enemy. Additionally, the XC can also amplify low-level psycho waves so as to enable a genuine new type using the Banshee to tame the NTD. Aside these new armored armor parts, the Dawn added a new attachment on its beam magnum, named the Revolving Launcher. This small addition compiled a beam jute, small bomb missiles, micro-head bombs, and flashing pulsed armored shell, all downsized to fit into the Revolving Launcher. The Banshee Dawn finally launched in space, with Freedom Arsenal as its new pilot, and after an altercation with Unit 1, it ended up assisting its sister unit in the closing hours of the Surneo-Xion War. Like the Unicorn, Unit 2 was supposed to have been dismantled following this event, but wherever the Federation really did that remains a mystery we cannot yet pierce to this day. And we have now recensed the first 3 mobile suits created by the UC project. In a future video, we will cover the remaining 2 mobile suits, the Phoenix and the Jesta. This will be all for today's video, but stay tuned for future lore content delivered on the same channel. Hit the like button and most importantly, comment and subscribe as it really helps the channel to flourish. So long for the new tabs until the time of our next special edition.